The strange paradox: boring people leave the strongest impact. We live in a world that glorifies spectacle. From flashy influencers to loud personalities, we're constantly taught through media, marketing, and social pressure that the more attention you command, and the more important you must be. Charisma is currency, excitement is power, and boring. Boring is the death sentence in the age of algorithm-driven validation. But here's the strange paradox no one tells you: it's often the most boring. People quiet, consistent, unassuming who leave the deepest, most permanent impact on the world around them. Not because they dazzle in the moment, but because they anchor everything around them. And anchors don't need to move to be powerful, they just need to hold. Think about that. The people who really shape your life aren't usually the ones performing. They're the ones who show up every day, without drama, without chaos, without needing to be the center of attention. And what makes this so paradoxical is that they're easy to overlook in the moment precisely because they aren't trying to be seen. But later, when the noise fades and the dust settles, their presence echoes louder than all the spectacle combined. Why? Because the world doesn't actually crave excitement. It craves stability. It craves trust. And the people who provide that quietly, reliably become the invisible pillars upon which everything else rests.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
I want you to think about someone in your life who fits that description. Someone who doesn't talk much, who avoids the spotlight, who might even seem boring by social standards, but when a crisis hits, you call them. When you're lost, you look to them. When everything is falling apart, their presence alone makes things feel centered again. Now ask yourself, why is that? Why do we overlook them when things are fine, but depend on them when it matters most? The answer tells us everything about the limits of charisma and the hidden power of consistency. Charisma excites. Consistency transforms. The philosopher Lao Tzu once wrote, "The best leaders are those the people barely know exist." And that line hits differently when you realize how much we associate leadership with attention. But true leadership, the kind that lasts, isn't loud. It's not even necessarily inspiring in the traditional sense. It's uneventful. It's boring. Not because it lacks depth, but because it lacks ego. And ego is what creates noise. Boring people, truly boring people, aren't trying to impress you. That's their power. Because when you're not performing, you're free to build. And when you build, you create what lasts beyond the moment. Here's where the paradox deepens further. The people who seem boring often live the most philosophically rich lives. But why? Because they're not distracted by the need to be interesting. They're not caught in the emotional roller coaster of performance and applause. They're present. They take their time. They listen more than they speak. They reflect and they observe. And because of that, they often understand things at a deeper level than those constantly reaching for attention. Their lives are less noisy, but more profound. They engage with the world not to be seen, but to understand it. And in doing so, they become the quiet philosophers of our time. Let me ask you something brutally honest. When did we start confusing interesting with important? When did we decide that the loudest voice in the room is the one with the most value? And what if the exact opposite is true? What if the people we call boring because they don't entertain us are actually the ones who are most awake? That's the risk of a spectacle-driven society. We become addicted to fireworks and forget the value of firewood. Well, fireworks are exciting, but firewood, that's what keeps you alive through the winter. This isn't just philosophy, it's practical. Because the more you chase interestingness, the more fragmented you become. You start optimizing your life to impress others, not to live deeply. And here's the hard truth. Interesting people are often forgettable. They leave sparks, not structure. They entertain, but they don't anchor. Meanwhile, boring people, the ones we overlook, become the foundation we don't notice until it's gone. And when it's gone, we realize it held us together more than we ever knew. So why does this matter for you? Because you've likely spent a lot of energy trying to be impressive, trying to be magnetic, trying to stand out. But what if the real power comes from doing the opposite? From becoming so grounded, so internally complete, so reliable and clear that people don't notice you at first, but can't function without you later? What if boring is just another word for essential? This idea flips everything on its head. And that's exactly why it's powerful. Because it challenges the myth we've been sold, that visibility equals value, that performance equals worth, that noise equals relevance. But in reality, the longer something lasts, the less exciting it has to be. And the people who last, the ones who truly leave a mark, are rarely the ones lighting up the room. They're the ones holding it up. The silent influence, how invisible people quietly reshape the world we live in, a culture that worships visibility. If you're not seen, you're assumed to be irrelevant. If you're not trending, you must not matter. But here's the contradiction that no one wants to admit. The people who truly shape the world rarely make noise while they're doing it. Their influence is subtle, almost imperceptible in the moment, but once you step back, you begin to realize they were the ones moving the pieces the entire time. That's the silent influence. The power of people who don't need to announce their presence because their work speaks for them. We underestimate the invisible. But invisibility is a form of strategy. It's not weakness, it's intelligence. The strongest rivers don't make noise until they move mountains. And the people who flow through life with quiet conviction, who don't need to insert themselves into every conversation, who don't fight to be right in every room, those are the people who walk away with real power. Why? Because they're not distracted. They're not managing attention, they're managing impact. And impact, when it's real, doesn't need to be advertised. Think of the teachers, mentors, or even quiet friends who shaped your thinking not by lecturing you, but by embodying a way of being. People whose values were so clear, so consistent, that even in silence, they influenced your choices. What made them powerful wasn't their volume. It was their clarity. And clarity, when lived out over time, becomes an invisible gravitational force. You don't see it, but you feel it. You adjust to it. You orbit around it. That's the kind of influence that doesn't fade, it accumulates. Here's the paradox. The more someone craves influence, the less they're trusted. The more someone pushes to be seen, the more we instinctively doubt their authenticity. But when someone is uninterested in performance, when they show up the same, whether they're being watched or not, we start to believe them. That kind of consistency is rare. And because it's rare, it's magnetic. We admire it not for its flash, but for its weight. It doesn't excite us, it centers us. We often wrongly associate influence with charisma. But charisma is just an accelerant, it burns fast and bright. Silent influence is infrastructure. It builds slowly, often unnoticed, until one day you realize that your thoughts, your behaviors, Your standards have quietly shifted to match someone else's. Not because they convinced you, but because they lived something so true, so solid, that you couldn't help but absorb it. Just like a tree doesn't need to announce its roots to hold up the forest, the person of silent influence doesn't need applause to validate their contribution. So how do we cultivate that kind of power in ourselves? First, we stop chasing visibility as a substitute for value. Just because people see you doesn't mean they believe you. And just because they don't see you doesn't mean you're not shaping something profound. The real question isn't, how many people are watching me? It's, am I building something that would still matter if no one ever knew I did it? But that's the threshold of silent influence. When your work becomes a gift to the world, not a performance for it. We also start paying attention to the way we listen. Boring people, quiet people are often the best listeners. And that makes them powerful, because when you listen deeply, you understand deeply. And when you understand deeply, your actions become surgical. You stop reacting and you start responding. You become the person in the room who speaks once, but everyone listens. Not because you're loud, but because your words are earned by your silence. Ask yourself, who are the people you trust the most? Are they the ones who talk endlessly? Or the ones who say little, but mean everything when they speak? Influence isn't about volume, it's about resonance. Resonance can only come from depth. The deeper your internal foundation, the more others feel it, even if they can't explain why. So perhaps we need to stop asking how to get noticed and start asking how to become undeniable. Not through noise, but through presence and through patience. Through the slow, steady practice of living what we preach even when no one is clapping. Because the paradox of silent influence is this: people won't remember what you said. And they might even forget your name, but they'll never forget how you made them feel about themselves when you were around. The power of predictability, why reliability is more impressive than genius. We've been trained to admire flash, to revere the genius who arrives with brilliance, says something extraordinary, and vanishes into the fog of mystery. We romanticize unpredictability, thinking that chaos somehow equals creativity, that inconsistency is a sign of brilliance. But in reality, the people who truly shape our lives, our work, and our futures are rarely the wild geniuses. They are the reliable ones, the ones who show up, the ones you can count on. And here's the philosophical twist that stuns us when we finally see it clearly. Reliability is more impressive than genius because it sustains everything genius cannot. Genius can impress you once. Reliability builds with you over time. A genius can spark an idea. A reliable person executes it, nurtures it, protects it, and brings it to life. We think we want people who blow our minds, but what we need are people who keep their word. You are where they said they'd be. Who do what they said they'd do. Who don't vanish into abstraction when things get hard. That's not just competence, that's character. And character, unlike talent, cannot be faked. It's easy to be brilliant once. It's hard to be consistent for years. And yet our world constantly overvalues the former and underappreciates the latter. Why? Because consistency lacks spectacle. It's not exciting. It doesn't create viral moments. But here's the deeper truth. The people who build empires, raise strong families, change communities, and leave legacies are not the ones who shine for a moment, they're the ones who endure. And endurance is built on predictability, on showing up even when it's boring, even when no one's watching. even when it's thankless. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Who do you admire more, someone who had a brilliant idea once, or someone who showed up for you every time you needed them? Who would you rather build a life with? A business with? A future with? You already know the answer, because the illusion of genius wears off, but the trust that comes from reliability compounds. It becomes the invisible currency of all meaningful relationships. And in a world obsessed with being impressive, reliability is what makes you irreplaceable. The reason this is so overlooked is because we confuse attention with admiration. But people don't admire you because you shocked them. They admire you because they trust you. And trust is built in repetition, in the mundane, in the boring. That's the beautiful irony. Boring people, those who are predictable, stable, calm, become the most extraordinary people over time. Not because they dazzle, but because they deliver, over and over again, without needing recognition, without needing to be reminded, without needing to be motivated. Their motivation is rooted in integrity, not adrenaline. Philosophically, predictability is a form of existential commitment. It says, I will not be moved by every storm. I will not be swayed by every emotion. I will not disappear when things stop being exciting. Predictability means you've chosen a path and you're walking it, regardless of applause. And that kind of self-governance is more rare and more powerful than any flash of genius, because it means you've won the inner war first. You've disciplined yourself to be dependable not just for others, but for yourself. In fact, the most powerful people in the world are not the ones with the most talent, they're the ones with the most self-control. The power to do what needs doing every day without being seduced by novelty or discouraged by monotony. That's what builds mastery. That's what builds legacy. Not brilliance. Boredom, repeated with purpose. So here's a better question than how can I be more interesting? Try this. Can people set their clocks by me? Can they trust me to be who I say I am, even when it's inconvenient? Even when it's not fun? That's the real test of character. And when you pass that test not once, but every day, you stop needing to prove yourself, because your life becomes the proof. In the end, genius may start fires, but reliability keeps the flame alive. The legacy of the unremarkable, why quiet lives, become immortal in memory. We idolize greatness in the form of spectacle, towering achievements, global fame, historical firsts. But when we look at the lives that actually shaped us, the ones that echo long after they're gone, they're rarely the loudest or most remarkable people in the traditional sense. They're the quiet ones, and the steady ones, the ones who, by all external measures, might have seemed ordinary. And yet somehow, when they leave, the world feels less whole. That's the paradox. The people we call unremarkable often leave behind the deepest legacies because they lived in a way that made others feel seen, safe, and loved. And their power wasn't in what they did once. It was in what they always did. They always showed up. They always listened. They always remembered. They didn't need to be interesting. They were present, and presence may be the most underrated form of greatness we have. Because in a distracted world, to give your full attention, to treat even small moments with care, is a form of reverence. It's sacred, and people remember it, not because it dazzled them, but because it centered them. We tend to think legacy is about achievement, but achievement fades. What lasts is how people felt in your presence. Did they feel judged? or accepted? Did they feel hurried or heard? Did they feel like a task to you or like they mattered? That's what people carry. Long after your resume is forgotten, long after the awards collect dust, what lingers is the energy you brought into rooms, the reliability of your word, the way you made people feel like their existence was valid, even if the world ignored them. And here's where the so-called boring person begins to shine. Because boring people don't need to be the center of attention, which means they leave space for others to be seen. They're not trying to impress, so they have the emotional room to witness. And being truly witnessed, deeply known, quietly understood, that's rare. That's unforgettable. That's where real legacy is born. Think of the grandparents, the teachers, the mentors, the neighbors who maybe never left their hometown, never published a book, they never posted on social media, but whose names are still spoken with warmth decades later. Why? Because they built something invisible, a pattern of love, a habit of service, a way of being that made others feel safe to exist. That's not just legacy, that's immortality. Now pause and ask yourself, what kind of legacy are you building right now? Is it made of noise or of meaning? Are you chasing attention or building trust? Are you collecting applause or cultivating depth? Because every day, in every interaction, you are laying bricks. And when it's all said and done, no one will care how exciting you were. They'll care how consistent, how kind, how rooted you were. Those are the things that stay. The truth is, we don't remember the fireworks. We remember the firewood, the warmth, the light, the quiet presence that kept us going. We remember the people who were boring in the best possible way, dependable, generous, humble, human. They didn't try to be gods. They just tried to be good. And in doing so, they became unforgettable. So maybe the goal isn't to stand out. Maybe the goal is to stand firm in your values, your presence, your quiet strength. Because in the end, the most powerful people aren't the ones who amaze us temporarily, they're the ones who anchor us forever. And that's the strange paradox. Boring people leave the strongest impact.